talk about some of the key changes really to ICH. And I want to try to approach this from a very practical perspective in terms of here's what the regulations say, here's some of the new verbiage, but the intent. So why does the regulations have changed? What is the purpose and how are we supposed to actually follow these changes in terms of making changes with either our protocol designs, our target enrollment, our risk-based management? So what are the regulatory authorities thinking and what direction are we going? So this is me. I've been in the industry for about 28 years now, and I've done everything from being a study coordinator to a CRA lead, CRA lead, CRA manager, program leader in oncology, program leader as well in rheumatology on a large global company. I've worked for both sponsors and CROs. I've worked in both drug and device, and have also had the pleasure the last several years of getting to help instruct some of the Barnett courses. And I also do quite a bit of auditing. So I am also approaching this from a QA perspective in terms of what I've seen when I do my own audits, when I've worked with the FDA and the EMA. The challenge that we have is, yes, these are the guidance documents, but the way that we interpret them, the way we have to apply them to a variety of therapeutic areas, to our variety of patients, clinical situations can be very, very challenging. So it is never going to be one size fits all. And that's actually the language you're going to hear repeated throughout the regulations and throughout the interpretation and explanations as we continue to move through these this year and moving forward. One size does not fit all. So our goals are to identify key changes that impact sponsor CROs and individual roles, explain the impact of revisions on clinical trial conduct and organizational practices, and opportunities for implementing. What does this mean to us? So we're going to be talking today about International Council for Harmonization. That's ICH GCP. So even the name has changed in the past 5-10 years. So we know that we can count on a lot of differences every single day. So I think it's important to remember where this comes from because it still drives the intent. This still drives our core principles. What we see is the change in terms of how we adapt these principles, but the concepts are the same. So we know that this originally came from World War II experiments. This was sort of the driver to have this international guidance. So during World War II, we're all familiar with it, whether it's family or history books or movies or stories of some of the medical experiments that were conducted during this time. So things like dropping acid on people's skin, things like removing organs to see how do people do, things like let's embed false shrapnel to see what happens. Will the patient's arm or leg turn gangrene? Will they survive? Is it better if we amputate? What happens if we don't? Exposure to hypothermia, just any number of scientific experiments to see what would happen. Now, during the Nazi war criminal trials, the defense was, well, this was a time of war. It was okay. These people were prisoners, so we could do what we wanted, and we did all of this in the name of science. We did this in the name of medicine, of helping our soldiers, of helping our people. But what happened to the concept of do no harm and the fact that these are human beings? These were vulnerable human beings who had no choice and were subjected to absolutely horrific experiments. So as a result, we have the Declaration of Helsinki. So we're still talking 1964. But this declaration was also recently revised. It's certainly kept up to date, had multiple revisions since 1964, and the verbiage keeps changing to match our times. But it's still the same document. So again, it's important when we think about these things, they're not new, but they all have the same intent. How do we protect people? How do we protect people in our clinical trials in a very practical way? What core rules do we need to remember in everything we do? And that sounds a little bit obvious sitting here. We're all doing this because we have a reason. Most of us work in the medical field, even in a very specific therapeutic area, because we have a family member who suffered, or because we believe in it. So we've studied it, we want to make a difference. So we come to this with very altruistic purposes, with the intent of doing the best we can. But we do also know that it's hard to design protocols. Sometimes it's hard to recruit patients. Sometimes it's hard to follow everything that has to be done because it doesn't make sense, or it's a little bit different than standard of care, or we didn't have time, or the patient didn't feel like it, and that's completely up to the patient. But did we also explain to the patient up front what was expected if they're going to be in the study? Maybe they didn't want to be in it to begin with. So are we really adhering to what has to be done? So Declan Helsinki was written and adopted in response to those war crimes. And a big driver of it was the concept of informed consent, that it must be obtained if at all possible. So certainly in our local regulations, whether in the US, Europe, UK, there's caveats in terms of what happens in an emergency situation, because we do clinical trials that are emergency interventions. But in general, we really have to think about who are the patients, what are their backgrounds in terms of maybe feeling coerced or pressure or making them somewhat vulnerable, and how do we protect them? So if we even think about, again, just variances in socioeconomic status, right there we already have a lot of pressure put on people, or a lot of suspicion, or in some countries the fear of even saying no, more so than others. So for example, in India, it was required that they start filming the informed consent process, that there is an actual visual record of part of the conversation. Again, the concept is they want to make sure that because of hierarchy or perceived class structure that was there historically and has technically been abolished, but historically, that somebody who is not working or is working at a much lower wage feels comfortable saying no to the physician who would be of a higher status. And I even see that in our elderly population in the U.S., or sometimes just people in general who are sick. You want help. You don't know when it's okay to say, I'm not comfortable with this, because you're afraid that if you say that, you won't get the help you so badly need. So that was the history. We know it's continuing to evolve. And out of all of this, we end up with ICH. So ICH has several sections. We'll quickly touch on those because one of the new things we should consider is with E6 and the revisions, it's not meant to be looked at in a silo. That's a very, very, very important concept. It is not meant to be used in a silo. So when we look at ICH, there's multiple topics. There's quality, safety, multidisciplinary, and the one we're focusing on today is efficacy, E.